having a conversation with Brittany, who is a vocal teacher, and she reached out to me about polyvagal theory and how it relates to those of us who are teaching, or those of you, I should say, those of you who are teaching music.
What drew me to polyvagal theory in the first place was like, oh, the vagus nerve. I know the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve innervates the larynx in the first place. So the idea that this is so intimately interwoven of the sound that we create, and then how we create what comes out in our voice is so tied to the state of our nervous system. And so I see this in singing students all the time, and then students in a music classroom. What they're able to produce vocally will be immediately affected by what physiological state they're in. And so if they're locked up in any kind of way, maybe they're, like the high notes don't feel easy today for some reason because something is tight, something is held. Their breath is not flowing as easily. So then that led me to kind of dig deeper into the theory. And then, I mean, I'm constantly just blown away by how much.
How did you end
Uh,
up finding me?
well, I started looking into people who've done applications. Like looking at the theory itself is great, but um, applying it to real life situations, applying it to education, then led me to you because, and then I found the polyvagal path to joyful learning, and um, ah, just like so, like I started like taking away like things that I wanted to specifically chat with you on, like from the book, just because I think so much crosses over. I mean, obviously, but specifically to music classrooms, I'm so curious about what that can look like specifically in a music classroom, which is different than many other classrooms. But sometimes it's like just looking at what we're already doing and intentionally putting it through the polyvagal lens.
Oh, I love that. Yes, that's what I was thinking when I've been thinking about it this week about music. And I was thinking it would be interesting to talk about what you already do in a music classroom and how that does fold into polyvagal theory and those concepts. I think
Absolutely.
because it's always great for people to feel like, oh, but I already do quite a bit of this. And then to be able to put the language to it and the vocabulary. When I wrote the book, when I asked Deb Dana, what do you want to have happen with this book?
Mm.
She said, I want to start to speak the same language if we could. So if we could use this vocabulary of befriending the nervous system and that sort of thing. And I said, well, that's real doable. And I think that was one of my objectives of writing the book was, can we look at everything we do through this lens, this polyvagal lens?
Yes. Yes.
Because we'll find there's a lot that we do, and we'll find that there's a lot we can improve on as well.
Yes. We just like fine tune and polish. Sometimes it's like we're doing something, but if we're doing something just out of habit, that's different than doing something intentionally for a specific purpose, for a student, for a class, for a moment in time. So many things that we do in a music classroom, not just the fact of like making music together, that in general can be so grounding, and can be a ventral anchor. Then I'm curious, like for those kids, I'm curious about keeping ventral in view. Like what can that look like? What can we be doing in a music classroom when it's typically like the logistics of the classroom is one teacher to however many students. Sometimes, especially if it's a performing ensemble, it might be a lot of kids with, one teacher, nobody else. It's not like you can have many one-on-one check-ins in a
Yeah.
class without leaving everybody else out for that moment. So I'm really curious about like the group organization of finding that, and with movement and with singing, with making music in general, and creating. I'm going to use that, the cultivating the community that can co-regulate together. But I think getting those wheels started is the hardest part, and then hopefully it's like the gardens that kind of take care of themselves after a while, self-sustaining ecosystem. Once it gets going, you would hope that things get a little bit easier.
Yeah, I call it the befriending school culture, where everybody understands their nervous system states and understands how to befriend it. And I think the best place to start is with the person who's leading, the mentor, the person in front of the room. So if that mentor, teacher, some schools are now calling them guides if you're into micro schooling, but if that person can model and saying, I'm in ventral right now, we're having this great experience, I'm ready to handle the day, I'm checking in with
Mm-hmm.
myself. And then when things start going off the rails a little bit, as they always do in classrooms from time to time, there's that myth about we always have to be in ventral, or we always have to be on the green path, and it just doesn't happen that way. We move in and out. And I think there's a relief in understanding that even if we're the most senior teacher in the staff, our students and we are going to move in and out of regulation throughout the day and throughout the period we're with those students. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
perfect opportunity to be able to say, wow, I'm really starting to feel dysregulated. Because if you can say and model, this isn't feeling very good in my nervous system. I'm getting kind of anxious here. You guys are talking over here and you are over here, and this is really upsetting to me.
Yeah.
Because being able to verbalize it is showing that awareness, that mindfulness, that I am starting to, as Deb Dana calls it, go down my autonomic ladder. I'm starting to move down into sympathetic, a fight or flight, or even further down is that dorsal vagal just shutting down and saying, like the teachers are doing in schools today, they're walking out in the middle of a day and saying, I'm done. I've had it. Like, and that would be kind of flight, but the ones who stay and say, it just doesn't matter, whatever I
Right.
do, this doesn't work, they're not learning, they're not progressing musically, then they just get into that dorsal shut down, kind of disconnected, which brings us to that next place of that connection. We're hearing so much about it, but it's really important because as we move down the ladder, we get more disconnected from our students and we get more disconnected from ourselves.
Right.
Like we aren't able to notice as much. And we were talking earlier about that introspective piece of being able to tune in, being able to tune in and notice when we are shifting. It's hard to do when you're in a classroom and you're on. But taking that moment, and I just have people put, and this has been used all over the place, but I've been using it for over 20 years. I just put my hand over my heart and the other hand over my stomach, and I just kind of take a breath, and you can feel amped. You can feel your heart rate start to speed up. You can feel things starting to get the cortisol starting to flood a little bit.
Right.
So the cool thing about this regulation in the polyvagal world is you can be a regulated, dysregulated person, if that makes sense. Like we
Sure.
can start moving into dysregulation, even as we're both parents. We can see ourselves start to move into, that dysregulated state, but saying it and being able to keep ventral in view, be
Yes.
able to keep one foot in ventral.
Hmm.
And what are regulating resources?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm thinking so much because so often thinking about connection, music teachers are, I mean, there's a million different setups for their community, their built-in community. They might be very likely they're the only music teacher in the building. And so there's other teachers, but all the other teachers are also, my experience so often is that people get into their silos and it's hard, it's challenging, and everybody's doing the best they can and they're working really hard and they're got their head to the grindstone. And so I'm thinking about connection of music teachers. They're on their own, or maybe they have somebody else, but maybe they're cut between different schools. And so I know in the district that we're in here, the elementary music teacher covers 6 different schools. And
Um,
so she's right. And that's not completely uncommon. And so finding connection in a day where maybe here they do like 1 week at a school and then they shift, but there's others. I've been in other districts where you're in a school in the morning and you're at a different school in the afternoon. So you're half time at each school and you flip. So it's really difficult to find those connections. And so it makes me think of the just like micro moments of finding the little things, everyday moments that can actually retune and connect about what might be useful for music teachers to connect either to themselves, to others around them, to adults around them, and to their students. Maybe they only see their students once a week.
yeah, it's a challenge. I was an itinerant health teacher, and I've been a reading coach where I go from room to room. Didn't have to go to a lot of schools, but when I was the itinerant health teacher, I went to all the different schools like that, and it wasn't very rewarding. I only lasted a year
Right.
because there wasn't any connection. I didn't know the teachers. And mostly I gave them bathroom breaks. So if I was 1 minute late, they were upset with me. And so I was
Right.
literally rushing and I didn't really even have that break.
Yeah.
And so I would probably go back again to when people are in that position, they have to always be taking care of their nervous system first. There's that tendency to want to reach out and take care of everybody else's. And I think first realizing as I'm moving from school to school, I feel hassled and I feel like I'm in a hurry. And so, what can I do just even in that transition? What small micro moment can I take for myself? Is it putting something on the radio, some
Mm-hmm.
music that they love that calms them, that makes them feel ready? And I think if at each school they could begin their time with their students checking in, so everybody checked in. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a great opportunity to model. I just went from this school to this school and I'm really feeling discombobulated. It was fast. I had to leave quickly. I ran into traffic, whatever it is, but I listened to a song on the way over and I really loved it in the car and I'm feeling ready. How about you? Let's all check in. That's a
Right.
great opportunity. And if all the students are checking in, we have that bi-directional link between the mind and the body. And so in that introspective piece, teaching them to check in, where are you right now? The student could have had the same kind of thing happen in the hallway. Something happened, they got bullied,
Yeah.
I don't know, they just flunked the last test in the class before. Those things happen, right? Their life doesn't start when you walk in the room with you.
Right. Yeah.
There's that sense of when a student has, blows. It often happened, it was a buildup. It happened in your room, but it usually wasn't you.
Sure.
It happened along the way. So I think I picture a world where teachers, I know students would start going, here we go, checking in again. I
Yeah.
can see that too. But with the kids, like, oh, but I think it's an important skill to teach, and it only takes a little bit of time. And if they are feeling dysregulated, and I think the key is that everybody has like that's why I did in book 2 was that backpack and what's
Right.
in there for them. What is eventual experience? What do
Yeah.
you have in the classroom? So think about a music classroom and let's talk about what they already do. So when a student is having a hard time settling in, what do most music teachers do for those students? What's available in the classroom to help them settle in and reconnect with themselves and then reconnect with the group?
Well, I've been thinking about this because obviously it depends on what age group and what type of music you're teaching, whether it's instrumental based, choral based, general music based, anything else. But speaking from my own personal experience as a like general music and choral music vocal based, there's always breathing exercises in the beginning of any, even if it's a like a choral ensemble, there's something that connects, and we do some kind of group breathing together. And that's something that would do, but in general music, there's usually a welcome song. There's usually some kind of transition song. And that was something that has always stuck out to me of helping with transition moments in within the class, but also the beginning and end. Almost every elementary music teacher is going to have their welcome song and their goodbye song, so some kind of music class is over, some kind of welcome to music class. um, so I think of those like it's always nice for me in the elementary music classroom when we're doing the welcome song. It kind of puts me, I feel like, okay, I know I can do this because I'm doing the song that I know. And especially with the younger ages, you're doing it many different ways. You're doing it again, but oh, now can we use our soft voices? And now can we use our louder voices? And we get to experiment with that, but it's predictable and we know it. And I can settle into that. And same as at the end. But there's breathing exercises. I'm thinking even an instrumental, um, they'll do their like there are warm up routines. You get in, even taking out your instrument, tuning is a routine, and doing scales is a routine. So something getting ready to go. Um, these are things that I think are present in every music classroom. Um,
And that's perfect. That predictability is really, for most people, very calming for the nervous system. When they know what's coming first, they know what's coming next, and then closing. There's a lot of research around the tribal energy of a group. And if we can
mhm,
all do something together, and we had talked about even just that singing together, I think in our classrooms, in general ed classrooms, I'd love to see more of that happening, because there's just, when I go to my son's concerts, and he's in the choir at Pima College, when the, oh boy, the dynamics of the singing, I just get goosebumps, and you can feel bringing the whole audience in when everybody's singing like that, and that vibration is there. So I think that in of itself is a real sense of safety for everybody in the group. And when we think about the 3 C's of safety, I think, and Dana calls them the 3 C's of well-being. I think that's an important thing too, is the choice, the context, and the connection, keeping that frame as well. So within that predictability, then there could be somewhere of choice, right? Like, which song, let's see where we're gonna go today.
mhm.
Song are we gonna, that choice can be built in as well, because that's a sense of, personal power when we have some choice over things. And then when I think about some of the movers and in the class, I'm thinking about when they're doing the breath work, would it be acceptable to add like some deep pressure work?
Mhm, mhm.
Some tap, 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 some tapping of some sort to that rhythmic. And I'm sure they do a lot of that anyway. I'm sure they work on rhythms, and all those things help shift nervous system states.
Right.
Dr. Bruce Perry talks about rhythmic pattern movement.
Mhm.
Now, in my mind, we're
That's
talking about
us. Yeah.
trauma. When we talk about trauma, every student should be in a music class where they're learning rhythmic pattern movement.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
just should. And music's always a sort of outlier. And I think music, art, and these types of things movement, they need to come more centered in our curriculum, but they're always on the fray.
Yeah.
And we
Mhm.
know that how important it is.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know one music teacher who doesn't have multiple stories of kids that, every other teacher is pulling out their hair about this kid
Right.
when they come into music class.
They're
Every
there.
Yeah, they're there and they're present and they're engaged, and
And that
and
tells
so
you, so I think what's really cool, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just
yeah.
had that thought, that tells you that that's what that nervous system is needing. When we see a dysregulated student who's dysregulated in all these different environments, and then they get into this one, that's where we observe. That's where we really befriend, and that student starts to learn about their nervous system as well. And
Hmm.
we say, what is it in this class that helps you regulate? And can we carry any of that over? Is there
Yeah.
anything that you can bring into your other classes that can help you when you're feeling dysregulated?
Hmm.
Like, that's a cue that we know what that nervous system's needing. We need to give that nervous system more of it. And I think that's one of the things I love about polyvagal theory too, is that we talk about it in terms of what does your nervous system need, not necessarily what do you need. It's not personalized. It's being curious and saying, huh, your nervous system seems to need something right now. Check in. And
Right.
what do we have in our classroom that can help you?
Yes. I I have really enjoyed, ironically, thinking about getting like moving away from like cognition a little bit more and moving into like checking in with the nervous system as opposed to like leading with like cognitively focused things and the check-in being like tell me about like tell me about how you're feeling or like
Yes.
yeah, exactly. I'm so curious about that, and I think that when I think about, oh, a challenge of the of music is that we don't get these one-on-ones, but what if that's talk based, and what if I don't need that? Like, what if I don't need to pull the kid aside and talk about what if I notice it in just seeing like physical signs? And what if, because then I'm just pointing it out anyways, like, what if in the class, we as a group do we add more movement into the song that we're about to do, because there's so much research that shows movement and really making an embodied experience of singing or playing, or can you walk the rhythm of the song that we're singing while you're singing it? Can you step the beat while you're doing it? And that's
Yes.
really prevalent in general music and in elementaries. And then it starts to dwindle when we get to adolescence, and then it goes into rehearsals. But um, that's exactly when we need it even more. Maybe not more, but just in general, still. But there's people. I mean, in every music conference, there's something about. There's multiple pedagogies that talk about adding movement in to the performing experience, to the rehearsal experience, um, and so that it's not just the conductor up here feeling the music in their arms and body. It's everybody gets to experience that.
And when we talk about cognition, that is actually embodied cognition. And I love that term. I love that sense that our brain isn't just housed here, it's throughout our body. That
Mm-hmm.
again, that bidirectional link. And Annie Murphy Paul's work with the extended mind, she talks a lot. That might be a book that you'd be interested in too. She talks about rhythm and movement and interoception. And she has some really interesting research done, and she did a ton of research. It's a well-researched book. So my trainings, I do talk about those three forms of cognition, and one is embodied, moving with our bodies, learning with our bodies, and interoception is part of embodied cognition. So that might be a part of your article where you might bring in that term, embodied cognition, is how do we learn with our bodies? And how do we learn to regulate with our bodies?
Right.
And what is that?
I'm curious what your thoughts are about, so moving with our bodies, learning with our bodies, and so much. I'm thinking like I immediately think about gross motor movement, big movements, but um, is there a difference in how our nervous system responds to it, whether it's small, like can it be small movements? Can it be in like, and then with the voice, I'm wondering like singing an internal movement. There's things going on, and we're using our bodies, and singing can be a very somatic experience, but it's not large movements. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on the difference between then, or like playing an instrument can be subtle movements. Does that count then as embodied
Yeah, and
cognition?
some students are much more quieter, smaller movement people.
Mm.
You think about people who like to knit or
Hmm.
write poetry or do small movement, like fine motor movement. It's still movement, and that movement helps activate that frontal lobe, that higher level thinking center of our brain. So some people are going to prefer it. Not everybody's going to be a big, especially some of our introverts. Like if you have them in a class and all of a sudden they have to move, and sometimes that happens in my workshops. I don't do really big stuff right away. I sort of, and then that's where the choice is. You can walk with me and march with me. And if you prefer, you can sit in your chair and you can tap on your thighs. You
Hmm.
can tap your feet. You can tap your fingertips. There's the safety and choice, because we assume everybody's going to want to get up. And I'm a big muscle movement person, so I assume everybody's going to want to.
Sure.
Background's dance. I was a dance major. And so I assume everybody's going to want to dance, but they're not. And
Yeah.
some people are don't feel as comfortable in their bodies and as comfortable with the big movement. So that could be a cue of danger. So we need to be aware of that. We need to be sensitive to that. And it could set somebody off if that doesn't feel safe for them. So when we're asking them to do something, can we give them a couple different ways to do it?
Hmm.
Get a partner. Do it up by yourself. Do we want to do it as a group? Those two, the different ways we can regulate. We can self-regulate, we can co-regulate, and we can socially share, regulate as a group. And sometimes we feel like, I just want to do this by myself.
Hmm.
Sometimes we feel like, "God, it'd be great if I had a partner." And sometimes it's like, oh, I'm not sure how to do this at all. Let's do it as a big group so I can watch and observe and kind of get lost in the group for a
Hmm.
little while and see how we're singing it, see how we're doing it. And then they can partner off, and then possibly at some point people can self-regulate. But we really put self-regulation first. I just bought a book on executive functioning, and I wanted to count how many times the author had self-regulation in the titles and in throughout. And I kept thinking, but co-regulation is such a powerful regulatory resource for people. So I'm like, I and schools are starting to understand that. And the more I do my workshops, people go, oh, I hadn't really thought. Like co-regulation always seems like that's the lesser, like, oh, if you can't, if you have to co-regulate, then you're not as good as those people who can self-regulate. But
Yeah.
some people are co-regulators. I often use my daughter as an example. She's in her apartment now. She's 28. She wanted to move out, and she did. And we're trying to teach her to go get the snack out of the cupboard and make her grilled cheese and put the waffles in the toaster and all those things. But she has to co-regulate first. It's really important. And when I ask her about it, she just says, because I like doing things with people, right? She likes doing things with people. So we're going to have co-regulators in our classroom. And when we constantly make them have to do everything on their own, practice on their own, sing on I mean, they don't sing necessarily on their own, but maybe they have to practice on their own, like their music. I don't know, I just want to bring that into our conversation as well. Just being aware of how much of that I think in music is probably not near as an issue as it is in a regular classroom. I'm sure, because they're doing a lot of socially group stuff and they're partnering off, and it's probably not near as big a thing, but in classrooms I see it.
Right, right. I think in more like in high school, if it's more of an academic music class, that might be definitely something to focus on. But for most, like either performance or general music classes, the default is group activity. Um, and the default is everybody all together. We're all doing this. And that's really nice. I like the image of the borrowing and lending. I think so often I think about co-regulation, and it's funny because as a parent, I think I'm very clearly doing both, and I'm borrowing when I need, but I'm also lending, but I as a teacher sometimes I just think about co-regulation as when someone's in need. And I don't necessarily think of it the other way as co-regulation too, as such a gift, um, that you are lending somebody else your regulated nervous system in that moment as well. And it's such a sweet moment, um, that it's not, oh, those who can't self-regulate, co-regulate, but that
Yeah,
it's,
that's a great way
we're
to
all
look
doing
at it. Yeah.
it. And
The
but
shared
I like that
experience.
image for that reason, to see both sides of that it's a flow.
Yeah, I like that a lot about Polyvagal too, is that whole shared experience, being able to lend and borrow nervous system states. I think that's really super cool. That's Deb Dana's interpretation of Dr. Stephen Porges's work, but I think it's super cool. And I don't know if there'd be anything more vulnerable. Well, there is, I'm sure, but public speaking and singing, if somebody said to me, you have to sing in front of a group. In fact, there's something in my workshop, where we do some cross crawl in different ways. We do it forward and then we go to the side like this and we sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And I
Mm.
have a mic, right? I'm mic'd in front of a group. I don't sing. Brittany, I just don't. I
Yeah.
just let the group sing. I say, and there'll be singers in the group who love to sing and have beautiful voices, and they carry it. And they carry it for the rest of us. We're like, oh my goodness, I can
Oh,
speak in front of a big group, but to ask me
sure.
to sing, so it's very vulnerable. So this other thought I had when I was thinking about our discussion is that there's a place also for CLA, that causal layered analysis, where we have to go through the myths of what we believe. Like I have a huge myth that I can't sing. Like that's a huge, is it a myth or is it a fact? I don't know. I've never been asked to sing or had anybody like you evaluate whether I can sing or not. But my myth is I can't sing. And so that feeds into my perceptions and my beliefs and my assumptions, is that I would never be in a choir. Oh my gosh, and I've never sing in front of a group. And then, how does that system, as we go up through those layers, how does that system support or limit what I'm doing? Well, in my system of trainings, I just wouldn't, it definitely limits me because I'm not gonna, with a mic, be singing anything. And then so my narrative is just basically, "Oh, I'm not going to sing in front of a group because I have a lousy voice." And so I think, and when I worked with a lot of high school students who were struggling with reading, I really had to go through that process. And in book 2, I call it restoring. So we have them restory. So I think that's important too. My myth in music could be I can't hit high notes.
Mhm.
I'm, what are they, alto, or I think what's the
You could be an
default?
alto, sing slower, sure.
Yeah, and they believe they can't get up that high. They can't hit that high note. That could be a myth, right? Or if they're playing a musical instrument, I can't get that rhythm.
Mhm.
I'll never be able to get that rhythm. So I think that, and then in turn, yeah, that story starts to get the nervous system to feel dysregulated, and you get this whole loop going between the stories and the nervous system. And there's some argument which comes first. And in the polyvagal world, they'll say the nervous system first through neuroception perceiving the danger. And I'm like, I think it's somewhere in between. I think sometimes our stories can create it. I think sometimes our nervous system, we create the stories to align with our nervous system.
Yeah.
And I think that's also really important. Like, I can't sing in front of a group, or when we have an audience, where does the whole group go, right? They walk out on that stage. Are they excited or are they anxious? And those are different feelings, right, in the nervous system. So I just can see so much how you would use.
Yes. I think I I have a million thoughts. One, just to put that out there, especially from my research with adult beginners, I am firmly of the belief that everyone can sing. I have seen people, I've worked with people who the first time we met, um, could not match a pitch that we played or that I would sing. They would constantly be all over. And there's progress. It's a skill and we learn it, and it's something that if you've been around it a lot, maybe it just kind of evolved as you are. But yes, no matter what, it's vulnerable. And when I work with people, especially who have told themselves these narratives, um, it's terrifying. And learning to, I always find that like it's not just about like, oh, building confidence. I feel like learning skills has to come first. And then having those moments where we celebrate, like, I want to point out that this just happened, and, like, point out the growth and really celebrate that growth for that moment. And then it's like the confidence comes when the skills get built.
That cultivation of skills I talk about in the book. Like we
Yeah.
can't just put polyvagal on top of everything. We still have to cultivate the skills. What skills do they need to be successful in this environment? And yeah, and those skills, as they get better at them, will build that confidence and keep them more in a ventral state. Even when they start to feel a little dysregulated, those cultivation of skills will keep them in a
Right.
place where they are not necessarily activated in their nervous system, right? Even
Right.
though it's a challenge, even though it's a song that's hard.
Right. And sometimes learning that song that's hard and then looking back and knowing, like, we've done this.
Mm-hmm.
That is then this point of pride and really helps you feel really good. And it's still sometimes when I think with performing ensembles, when you put kids in front of an audience now, you just never know sometimes. If they perform on a regular basis, it's that, because getting up in front of somebody and singing is now a whole new skill than singing in the class together. Because if we've created this environment in the classroom, all of a sudden I've asked my students now to show the skills that we've practiced here, but now in front of this whole auditorium of, of parents and friends and peers and everybody else, and that adds on a layer. And so it's really interesting to me about people's view of music ensembles in schools and thinking about mindset of this like fixed growth situation. When an ensemble performs, somewhere along the line it still becomes like this class is about a product, and it never was about a product, but when we add a performance to it, that's like the class gets evaluated based on how they performed on this one moment, which doesn't actually fit the situation of what the class was. Am I making any sense? Like, this is a whole different situation. We're in front of people now. Um, it's not actually what we were doing in the class.
And there's a disconnection. I'm picturing that, and I was picturing you have the students walk out on stage, but then they have all the strangers in the audience. And so they're disconnected from their performing experience
Mm-hmm.
because they don't know, and they don't necessarily feel safe. They don't know how the audience is going to be judging them. So we have a disconnection. If I were in charge of a performance like that, I would talk with the audience and I would engage them in a singing experience for a minute. I would engage them to all sing together and feel uncomfortable, the singers in the room. I would just do a quick something where all of a sudden we're all together. We're in this together instead of it's us up here on stage and it's you out there in the audience. What could you do to bridge and to make everybody feel like they're part of that community equally?
Mm.
And then the nerves would go away because the people will laugh,
Yes.
if you all of a sudden the tension breaks.
Mhm.
And I know it, Daniel, when he's performing, his his instructor always talks to the audience about the song, and he gets so passionate about why he picked the song and why it moved him and why we love to sing it, and gives a little history, and he involves us. He always chats with us. And we
Yes.
feel brought in. We feel like, oh, we're all in this together. We're all talking about this song. And now when the students sing the song, it's like, oh, I can see that part where he talked about where they get really emotional, or I don't know,
Mhm.
there's just that connection to the audience has to be made. It can't
Right.
just be, I'm on this, we're performing, you guys are out there. There's got to be something that bridges that audience to just make the nervous systems of, well, the people in the audience are stressed out too, because say their child has a solo, they're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
What if
How's
they
it gonna
blow,
go?
what if they blow the solo? I mean, I'm always one of these, like, the worst case scenario, like, oh my gosh, what if something goes off the rails with this? So even parents, even though they're coming to support, can feel a little stressed out about, will my child who's playing, I don't know, an instrument like the flute be the one that squeaks?
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Who
So
knows? Oh man.
there's that collective, everybody all kind of holding their breath.
Mhm.
Right? I hope it goes off well. I hope the kids do well. I hope nobody's embarrassed. Everybody's feeling that generally, unless, like you said, they have all this confidence and they walk on, like glee. Well,
Well, that's the thing. And so then you have ensembles who perform on a regular basis and they're practicing the skill of getting in front of people. And so if you perform at like an adjudicated event, you don't necessarily get to make that connection
yeah,
like in the community. But if they're doing it on a regular basis, they're practicing the skill of performing. Most schools maybe have two concerts a year, maybe. And that's not really enough to practice that. But that being said, there is exactly what you're saying. There is a movement right now where teachers are doing more of, especially coming out of COVID, where performances weren't really possible in person, or maybe we sent out videos or something in the few years, but um, there's definitely a move right now for informances instead of performances, of just shifting the lens just a little bit, where we're going to inform the audience about the learning that has happened in music classes, as opposed to like, you know, and now we're just going to perform this
yeah,
thing, where it's like pulling back the curtain a little bit and letting them in, letting them behind the scenes, talking not just about like the context of the song, but what makes it challenging, what makes it worthwhile learning experience for the students you see in front of them. There's also a movement right now. Some teachers are doing like community sings, where they do involve. I know I love doing that when I'd say like, and now this next one is for all of us. And so you'll find the lyrics in your programs,
yeah, there
um,
you go.
and we all just sing in it, and um, it makes it an event, um, and a shared thing at that. But I like the idea.
So that's something that you're doing in your community that you could put under that sense of building community connection. That's all good stuff, right?
And I like the idea that even viewing that, because I think I was so busy viewing it as um, the reason to do it would be really just to let everybody know like that this is a like just to remind everybody that it's vulnerable and it's scary to do the thing that these students are about to do, um, but that they have learned skills along the way. So however this goes, they have actually learned a lot of skills. But I like the added layer of the why being to
Yes.
be in a shared moment and
Yeah.
to release tensions and shake off, to laugh and just feel like we're all in this together, everybody, audience included. Um, I
Increase the
love
signals of, yeah, to increase those signals of safety. I think in everything that they're doing, if they're performing, there has to be a lot of cues of safety. And, Dr. Terrell talks about danger maps. And for some of the students, a danger map item might be some trauma that happened where they did get out on stage and they did blow it or something. And so they have this, you know, this experience and it's activated and they get back on stage again, or they were the squeaker and they were really embarrassed by it or something. So looking at and having them check in before performances and talk about what are your cues of danger with this. I mean, actually use the words. What are your cues of danger with this experience? What do you think might happen? And then
that.
build in those more signals of safety. I like how Deb Dana says we can't always just decrease the signals of danger. We have to increase the signals of safety. So in everything you're doing, you're looking at how does this feel for everyone's nervous system? How many cues of danger are there walking out there on the stage? How many cues of safety can I offer them?
Can you talk a little bit about the vagal break?
Yeah, that's tricky, isn't it? The vagal
Mhm.
break. So it's only activated in sympathetic, which I didn't know. When I was writing the book, Deb Dana caught that. I didn't specifically say that. So the vagal break is where the heart, it allows, it's the sinoatrial node on the heart, and it allows the heart to speed up when it feels like it needs more blood
Mhm.
flow and cortisol and all those things in the system. But then it also slows things back down, like riding a bike, going downhill, you can put the brakes on when you start going too fast.
Mhm.
So students in our classroom with vagal brake issues that don't have that flexibility, we hear it all the time. They can't transition. They can't go from one thing to another. They start bouncing off the walls. Or they come in from recess and they're still revved. That vagal brake is what brings it back down so that they can sit and do some work. They go to the lunchroom, it's all this energy. Then they have to, if they come back into the classroom, they bring that energy back in. And the vagal brake is what helps with transition and helps to go from, if we're watching a movie and we start laughing, but then you can hear in the theater, then it gets quiet again. That laughter is the vagal brake, allowing for that playful energy to come into the system. But then it also says, oh, whoops, we're being quiet again. Now it's a serious part of the movie. And that flexibility and that toning only happens with practice. So we practice by red light, green light. Kids play that game, red light, stop, green light, go. Those are the things that help tune the vagal brake. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of vagal brake, I would think, in a music hour, because
Mhm.
they have to play, stop, wait. I mean, I've seen it where they're right in the middle of something, it's like, stop.
Yes.
Well, to play an instrument, you're going to be a little more revved up, right? And you're going to get going, but then you have to all of a sudden just stop. So there's a lot of stop and starts.
Yes. Yeah, I think
And pauses, just reading music, right? One hand has to pause, the other hand, even when I'm thinking about playing the piano, which I play poorly, but once in a while, there's even the pauses in the notes, right? You have that little pause.
well, yeah, you've got your just the natural and rhythm of the melody itself, and there's so often kids will actually play too fast until they get to a spot where they have to slow down because they can't navigate those notes just yet. And on any instrument, they'll go fast, 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 and then go really slow. But when they can't physically do it, so keeping the steady tempo is always a struggle with learners. But I know there's always a kid in any band or any like you get really involved in the music and you're playing, and then the conductor stops to go back and review a spot, and there's at least a kid who just really doesn't want to stop. And keeps playing, or sometimes it takes a couple measures for everybody to actually realize that the conductor has stopped them, and to go back and do the work. And then that transition is always hard, I think, especially in bands, just because it's inherently louder. Everybody's in their own groups. Um, I'm curious, toning happens with practice. Um, in, let's say, like a high school, let's take band, high school band, to practice that, because you do have, is is stopping and starting in the rehearsal process, is that practice, or is that like having to, or is that dysregulating because you're having to use this thing that isn't skilled enough to, or toned enough to keep stopping?
I think I might teach vagal break retuning, not with an instrument and not in the using music. I think
Mm,
I might do it with walking around the room, starting and stopping,
okay.
or pressing, or clapping, stop, let's go
Mm,
again.
got
So
it.
I think I might do it in something that's, I don't know, it seems like that'd be really hard to do it with a musical instrument, because you get into the flow and I know that would probably drive me crazy if I all of a sudden got moving and then stop, we got to start over again. I'd be going, oh my gosh. And some kids, I think that could be very dysregulating for them. And again, that's part of it, is checking in. And when we're all seeing that happen, for the person in the lead to be saying, I noticed when I asked you to stop. For some of you, that was really dysregulating. Check in right now. And let's take a breath, or let's, breathing is great, but and I know they need it for music, but generally I work with a lot of students, and my daughter's one of these kids who she can't take a deep breath. She's been through the whistle program and OT and all of this, and she can't blow a whistle, blow up a balloon. So deep breathing for her won't work. So shrugging is can work just as well. So let's just take a shrug, or sometimes it's like, I use deep pressure. Let's just press, 10 dots on this palm and shrug, and 10 on this, just to physically show them what a break is in the body, right? It's one thing to like play, stop. But I think it's another to actually feel the pause in your body. And I don't think they have time to feel it in their body, right?
Mm.
I think they're just all of a sudden, okay, now we go back to the beginning, we start playing again, and there isn't any kind of checking in with, am I back?
Yeah.
Am I still here on my transition? Am I back? And I do think that first, if you have any students who have ADHD or any autism, or on the spectrum at all, I think that can be really hard for them. So when
Yeah.
we're looking at diversity in the classroom, most of all my students I worked with, and I'm a reading teacher, they didn't have what I call a pause button. They're all go or all stop, and they didn't know how to pause and didn't know how to transition. So a lot of the activities I do, like I have a poster where I have R, L, and then I have a line, and that's where they have to pause. So I kind of teach them to pause. I had a music teacher actually come visit me and work with me, and she took all my school moves activities and put notes in and put different things that the kids have to learn, and they moved with the notes. If it was on one staff, they use their hands, and on the other, like treble clef, they do their feet. I mean, she had this whole clever way that she moved with these notes. And so you could do that with a pause if you're looking at a row of notes and you have a pause in there, but I do something physical. I don't know if I do instrumental or singing or whatever. I think I try to get them more in their bodies for it and feel what pause feels like.
That's great. That's super helpful because then and that makes sense to take it out of context. I was thinking like, well, yes, they're technically practicing vagal break, I guess, when they have to start and stop, but that's the thing that you want them to get better at. So
Yeah,
that's really helpful because then they can do something outside of context, lower stakes, but they can still
great.
check in and still notice, and then carry over the same check-in. I imagine, especially maybe in the beginning of the year as you're laying the foundation for these practices, when you do it with the instruments, to notice if it was tricky to stop when we asked, do a check-in. I like the idea too of adding on the pause, adding a shrug or adding something that could be like, whew, shake that off.
Yeah, when
So
they're doing the transition, when they're playing, I think if the teacher could figure out a pause, some movement that is their pause, that gets them kind of back into their bodies, that would be really helpful. Then go back.
right.
I often use the classroom door for teachers. I say, once they're inside your door and they've been out at recess and they've been clowning around, it's very hard to get them settled in when they've brought the energy in. So
Mm-hmm.
think of your door as the transition. And I'd like you to start getting them ready outside in your hallway. That's where they do like wall push-ups or something, so that you're doing it outside of the classroom so that they understand once they cross that threshold, it's a different energy in here.
Right. Oh man, I used to teach in the basement of a high school, and I shared the only other thing on that floor was the lunchroom. And I was right across the hall from the lunchroom, and it was that all the time because the energy on like in the basement was lunchroom energy. And it was very difficult to shake that. So that
That would be
resonates with
really a
me.
challenge. Yeah, I was thinking about how I would even handle that. that would be a real challenge. I know at my daughter's high school, it's called the Ant Hill because they had so many hills at this school. And where her special ed classroom in the afternoon was, it was all downhill. So these boys were in full run. They would parkour over things and they
Yes,
would
yes.
just kind of stumble, run into the room, and it was chaos. And
Hmm.
so I talked to she said, oh, ugh. And I said, well, the energy's built up, so we got to do it outside. So we put some actually handprints out on the wall, and we actually had them stop out there, and they had to stop and do some wall push-ups to shift that run, but we had to do it outside so that when they came in, it's just so hard. You're setting that tone once they're inside. If you allow that chaotic energy inside your room, it just sets the stage for the nervous system to say, I can be like this inside this room.
Yes.
Instead, you pause outside and you transition outside.
Mhm.
You get them ready, and it's like we're entering our sacred space in here. Like this is
Yes.
right. This is our
Yeah.
space where we learn.
Right.
And can we sometimes get excited? Of course. And sometimes, upbeat, of course. But we don't want that frenetic cafeteria. I love that expression, the cafeteria energy.
It is.
Use that,
Cafeteria energy.
right?
It's a very
Like
clear energy.
basement cafeteria energy. They do pick up on that, and then they just bring it right in.
Yes.
And so, yeah, mm,
That makes me think of like the how difficult it is to be the quietly still, and and the bringing organization. I love that because it's like we can find this like playful energy in the classroom, um, but it's gonna have an organization underneath it. Like it's
yeah, you're mobilized, but it's organized, and there's a rhyme and a rhythm and a reason to it. And I do see these students who are a lot in sympathetic as disorganized mobilization. And we ask them to go from, 100 miles per hour down to quietly still without any shifting gears. I did one of my newsletters, I talked about the shifting gears. They have to go from fourth to third to second to first, right? Instead, we just go from fourth gear to first gear. And isn't that what happens with music all day long? They're in fourth gear playing, then all of a sudden it's first gear, and they have to stop and they have to listen and they have to look at the instruction that you're giving them. It's a real vagal break experience in a music classroom. I could see that. And that'd be a good thing for you to talk about in your article.
That's great.
That can cause a lot of disorganization and a lot of mobilized energy that's disorganized. So I think the key would be to a signal for the stopping, and then something that everybody's doing until everybody's there. And then that shrug. And it takes, I know there's a time factor. We only have them for this much time, and it might take a minute or two or three. But I think that minute is what pulls everybody back together, because if it's not, what I see in classrooms is the energy amps during all these
Mm-hmm.
transitions and recess and cafeteria. Before you know it, it's just all ramped up. Unless we bring it back each time after each really high energy thing, we have to bring it back. We have to quiet it back down. It's like putting a lid on boiling water. It's gonna boil over. And for some of those bottom quarter, the kind of the students who are always the ones that the teachers feel like they just get dysregulated so easily, that's how they are. It's just by the end of the day, and then they go home and then they have to do homework and everything blows at home.
So many of the things, and I think it's nice for any teacher, like we said in the beginning, to be reminded of the things that they're probably already doing that um, through this lens can be a cue of safety. Um, and but then and also to know to intentionally include them. And what you keep saying, which I really love, is acknowledging it verbally, saying things out loud. And I love that idea of not just doing it, but saying and acknowledging why you're doing it, or noticing like, oh, I'm noticing can we name the cue, like what cues of danger do we have? What do we set? How do we sense danger in this situation? And what cues of safety can we have here that might um, make us feel a little safer to engage in this class right now, or having choice and saying that out loud.
Um,
Um, I really appreciate the idea of acknowledging self, like the regulatory state of the teacher, and acknowledging that out loud to model just feeling okay as a teacher. I to say things out loud, that I'm also a human, that I'm also having feelings, that I don't have to keep it locked up. Um, Not that I'm gonna, let it all loose in front of the class, but just acknowledging that I'm going through the same motions that I'm asking them to go through, that I'm gonna have my routines. And so I so appreciate that.
and
Um,
sometimes the day something's happened, that it's not the students that have triggered it. And sometimes it's really important to acknowledge that something happened last period and I'm still a little bit discombobulated from it, and it's not you, and you're gonna feel a little bit of that from me. I just want to acknowledge that I'm still working through what just happened. Because sometimes we feel like we can't say it, but we can. And so, because the students are reading us anyway, that whole social engagement system, they're looking for cues in our face, or smiles, or that it's safe. And so if they walk in the room and you've got this look on your face of like, oh, I'm just so frustrated, and this was just such a rough day. I think it's really important for us and our own children that when we're having these kinds of days, that we let the people around us know it's not you. I'm working through something right now, and you might sense it. It's nothing that you've done, and let's have a good session,
right.
and know that last session something happened that has dysregulated me. And I think that's wonderful to teach them how to use the language, how to use the words, that's where words I think can be really helpful.
Mhm.
And I think all of with polyvagal for me is explicit visual, where you can see it. Take it out where we can see it,
Right.
so that we explicitly understand and know where our regulating resources are, and who they are, and what they are.
I am so grateful for your time.
Oh, it's
I'm
been wonderful. I've really enjoyed talking to you about it.
It's the
Yeah.
same here. Well, have such a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you
Yeah.
again for your
All
time.
right. Yeah. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
If you've stayed this long, that means you've liked the content and the discussion. So please do us a favor and like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the algorithm and to get the information out there. Thanks for all you do for children. Have a great day.